You know, I remember I used to work at this hotel overnight, right? And they used to play music in the lobby, which was a good thing because it kept me from falling asleep, working overnight. But look, one night, right, I came in and the music was off. And I had asked the desk clerk, like, yo, why the music off? And they told me that they couldn't play no music no more because a guest had complained because the song Me So Horny by the Two Live Crew was on, and she didn't want her kids to hear the song because I guess the kids was repeating the song and laughing. Crazy. Two Live Crew, man. I love Two Live Crew. Even though a lot of controversy came with them because, their music was labeled obscene and nasty, but I can say this though, their music wasn't really talking about drug dealing and killing, even though they were around it in the 80s in Miami at that time. Their music was about having fun and having a bunch of women. And Fresh Kid Ice, aka Chinaman, was probably the most popular out of all of them. I mean, everybody knows Uncle Luke and, Luther Campbell. But Chinaman, being Asian and a black group, just stood out, and he can rap too. Plus, he can rap. He had some legendary bars he spit. They say he's the first Asian rapper in history. Two Live Crew, man, put Miami bass on the map. They were the first hip hop group in history to even release a live concert album. They was the first group to release a live concert album. They was the first to put a parental advisory sticker on their music. But here's the most important thing they did. They opened the doors for a lot of the hip hop artists to use their freedom of speech. And not just hip hop, all genres of music. They fought for music not to be censored. And what's sad is some people don't really consider them hip hop. They say they were a novelty act. They don't get the respect, man. The strip clubs put them on the map, and in return, they made strip clubs famous and popular. No other rap group or artist has faced more controversy than them. Two Live Crew shows were some of the raunchiest, nastiest, craziest shows ever. It was so wild, man. Girls would do anything on stage in front of the whole crowd. But I want to focus on Fresh Kid Ice for this episode, Chinaman. And the rest of the Two Live Crew too. Shout outs to Uncle Luke, Brother Marquise, and Mr. Mix all through this episode. But we're going to focus on Chinaman and the life he lived. So let's get to the story, right? Now, Fresh Kid Ice, aka Chinaman, birth name is Christopher Wong Wan, and he was born May 29th, 1964 in Port of Spain, Trinidad and Tobago. He was the eighth born of 10 kids from his parents, Olive Coffey and Lawrence Wong Wan, who were Trinidad and Tobago natives of African and Chinese descent. Chinaman said both of his grandmothers were black, and his grandfather was Cantonese. He said his grandpa was a Chinese player who owned a restaurant in downtown Trinidad and had like six wives working there, six wives working in his restaurant on different shifts. Now, growing up in Trinidad though, he was influenced by a lot of reggae music, and his family used to DJ at parties. And he wrote his first rap in Catholic school, which was about a Catholic prayer. Now, by the age he turned 9 years old, his parents left to go to New York to make a better life for the family, leaving him and the rest of his brothers and sisters with his grandmother. Now, once they got things together in Brooklyn, New York, they sent for the family, which was around 1977. And when they got to Brooklyn in 1977, They had moved there a day before the blackout had happened. If y'all remember that 1977 New York blackout, which was caused by a lightning storm that lasted 25 hours. But when that storm had happened and caused that blackout, people were looting, rioting, starting fires and everything in New York at that time. It was crazy. The blackout, that blackout was so crazy. Look, subways had stopped and doctors from the hospitals were performing surgery outside using car batteries. Wow, that's crazy. Matter of fact, 1977, that same year they moved there, the son of Sam was on the loose, murdering people and everything. It's crazy at that time. But anyway, Chinaman said, when he got to New York, that's where he learned a lot about the streets and hip hop music. He was listening to Kumo D, Treacherous 3, Busy B, and the list goes on before hip hop was even on the radio. But it was kind of rough for him at first when he got to Brooklyn because, he was a very shy kid. Believe it or not, he was shy. But he got robbed for his watch. Kids used to make fun of him until once he started lifting weights and got big and started playing football, they left him alone. Now, once he graduated from high school, he ended up joining the military. He went to the Air Force as a medical lab tech. And that's where he met future 2 Live crew members, Mr. Mix and Amazing V, when he got stationed in California. Amazing V, he was from Brooklyn too, but he would leave the group before they actually really blew up on the scene. And that's when they put Brother Marquise, who would actually join later on down the line. But I'll get to that later on. But so Amazing V, Mr. Mix, and Chinaman, when they got together, they clicked because they all love hip hop. And they started throwing parties on the military base, at community parks. And, Mr. Mix started to become popular for his DJing skills. Mr. Mix was the key to all of them coming together because he was the one that had the turntables and he had a drum machine he bought a drum machine. But see, Chinaman, during that time, he wanted to make music. He wanted to rap. So Mr. Mix, Amazing V, and Chinaman, they came up with the name 2 Live Crew. So once they became a group, they recorded the songs called The Revelation, which was Amazing V's song. And him being from New York, he was doing that conscious rapping at the time. But on the other side of the record, there was a song called Beatbox, which was Chinaman's song. And that song was had a lot of that 808 bass sound in it. Nobody had ever heard bass like that. And they had those claps too in it. And this was way back in 1984 when he did that song. Now, like I said, right, Mr. Mix had bought the Roland TR-808 drum machine. Because, after he heard that was the same drum machine that African Bambaataa used for his song called Planet Rock. That's why he got it. Plus, Marvin Gaye used that same drum machine for the song Sexual Healing. And the Isley Brothers also used that same drum machine for the song Between the Sheets. Some credit Mr. Mix and Luke for Miami bass music. They basically created the hip hop South sound. That's crazy, but we'll get to that later too. So, they ended up starting a label called Fresh Beat Records after they did them songs. And they had went to a distribution company called Macola to press their records. Macola is kind of famous in California. It was a distribution company and they pressed up a lot of the West Coast rappers' music at the time, like the World Class Wrecking Crew. That was Dre's first group, Egyptian Lover, Too Short, Ice-T, and many more. Now, somehow, the songs they did ended up in Miami. And the people loved it, the beatbox junk that Chinaman really did, right? And Miami, they love the music. They like a lot of music with bass. And one person who really loved it was Luke, who at the time was DJing at clubs. And, he was a promoter also. and was always bringing famous artists to Miami to do shows. Luke was a businessman at that time. Now, according to Chinaman, he said his line in the song called Beatbox, where he mentions the name Luke Skywalker, influenced Luther Campbell to call himself Luke Skywalker. I don't know. That's what he said in the book. But Luke loved the song Beatbox, like I said, the Chinaman song Beatbox. So he loved that song so much, he started booking them for shows, paying for their flights and putting them in hotels to come to Miami to perform. Because you have to remember that they were still in the military at the time. And they just couldn't believe that Luke wanted them to do a show. And at the time, they didn't know anything about the music business, but Luke at the time was learning himself. He was a promoter. And as they became more popular doing shows in Miami, that's when Luke started managing them. And then he joined the group as a member. He was more of a hype man at first of the group because Luke knew how to get the crowd hype in Miami. That was his town. So, the rest of the 2 Live Crew members asked him to join and manage them. Now, Amazing V, who was one of the original members, he ended up leaving 2 Live Crew. And that's when Mr. Mix brought in Brother Marquise to replace him. Brother Marquise was from New York too, but he had moved to California. And that's where Mr. Mix had met him back in the day when he used to do music with Rodney O during their high school days. Brother Marquise said, now when he first joined 2 Live Crew in the beginning, he said kind of felt like Chinaman really didn't want him in the group. And he also said him and Luke really never got along to this day. That's from Brother Marquise. But also around that time, Mr. Mix and Chinaman decided to leave the military to pursue this music full time. So they moved to Miami because it was popping in Miami. Chinaman said he wasn't too worried about leaving the military because if the music didn't work out in 6 months, he gave it like a 6 months time frame. He was going to go into the medical field with his Air Force medical lab specialist training. And plus his dad had a job lined up for him back in Brooklyn anyway. So now we're Luke and Brother Marquise in the group, right? Luke knew the music that, people in Miami liked. And at the time, Miami had a dance that became very popular called Throwing the D. And Luke wanted them to create a song for that dance. And in 1986, they released a song called Throw the D, which became a big hit in Miami. And that's when Luke tried to get them a record deal, but nobody wanted to sign them. So Luke created his own record label called Luke Skywalker Records, and which later on turned into Luke Records. But no major labels were signing hip-hop artists in the South at that time because New York was on top. But all of the 2 Live Crew members were supposed to be part owners of the label Luke Skywalker Records under a verbal agreement. But Luke was more of the businessman of the group though, and he was the one that he took his own money and pressed up the records and started pushing the music all through Miami with his connections he had. Luke was actually in the pressing plant himself, pouring the stuff to make the vinyl, putting the label on the records and everything. He was a hustler, man. They say Luke established the first and only African American owned record label in the South at that time. Wow. He created the first South hip hop label. You gotta give his credit, man. Give Luke his credit for doing things, man. But anyway, the songs, right? Throw the D, Get It Girl, and We Want Some P, which was written by Brother Marquise. Big songs in Florida at the time. They became big songs in Florida. Throw the D actually sold over 500,000 copies independently. They were getting money for real. And they started doing tours with big rap acts at the time because it was all a lot of the New York rappers, but they had to put 2 Live Crew on the list because they had the #1 song and they was getting money, so they had to put them on the tour. Now, according to Luke, he said they made the song We Want Some P because the group Run DMC was acting like some peas, if you know what I mean. Because they was on tour with Run DMC, right? And one night in Mississippi, Run DMC's manager was hating on Two Live Crew because the South was showing a lot of love to them. They was in Mississippi, so the South they loved Two Live Crew. But Run DMC's manager told them like he was hating on them, and he told Luke them they only had 3 minutes to perform. So that's when Luke got mad. Him and the Two Live Crew got mad and told Mr. Mix to start scratching Run DMC's song called Peter Piper. And they had the crowd chanting F Run DMC. 15,000 people out there, right? And Run DMC and they staff ran out there. They ain't like it, and they almost came to blows. Now a lot of the East Coast rappers wasn't feeling them either because they was from the South. But the crazy part is New York was one of their biggest markets. They was selling the most records in New York than anywhere else. But on July 25th, 1986, they released their debut album titled The Two Live Crew Is What We Are, which ended up going certified gold independently. But then some controversy came, when they would perform those songs on that album. They'd be in towns and they would get kicked off stage by the cops and everything. And look, a Florida store clerk faced felony charges for selling their album to a 14-year-old girl. Wow. The song Throw the D became so popular that Luke decided to create a parental advisory sticker because kids was buying the albums and parents started complaining. And Luke said he had got the parental advisory idea from how the movie system do. They, how they rate their system. Movies got the rated R and their PG-13 logo on it, and that's how he came up with the idea. That's crazy. Two Live Crew created the parental advisory logo. Wow. But some say that parental advisory sticker was already out because Tipper Gore, former Vice President Al Gore's wife, she had heard her 11-year-old daughter singing the lyrics to Prince's song called Darling Nikki back in 1984, right, from the Purple Rain movie. And that's when she formed the Parents Music Resource Center, PMRC. And they put together a list of songs at that time called the Filthy 15 that they felt under the classification of porn rock. Wow. They say songs from Madonna. Who's on the Filthy 15 list? Had Madonna on there, Prince, Twisted Sister, AC/DC, Cyndi Lauper, Def Leppard, and some other artists. So I guess we can say that Two Live Crew is the first rap act to have the parental advisory sticker. But anyway, so also around that time, right, Chinaman had got married, but it didn't last long because the lifestyle they was living, man, the partying, the women, all the cheating, they were wilding at that time. And look, Chinaman said he never messed with no white girls because they were a lot of trouble and put rape charges on you and could get you lynched. Wow. So look, the album, right, The Two Live Crew Is What We Are, is out and it's selling like crazy independently. Everything is going good. But then Chinaman almost dies in a car accident, which is why we always see him with an arm brace on. Now the story goes with that incident, right? Because Chinaman, in every interview, he just regrets. All his regrets say, I wish I would never got in that car. But anyway, so one night before Mother's Day in 1988, him and one of his friends from the military was hanging out with two girls they had met. And, they was riding around in his friend's Camaro. Chinaman was in the back seat and had fell asleep. And his friend who was driving ended up falling asleep too. And they ended up crashing. And Chinaman and the girl in the back seat was thrown through the window. Chinaman said his body skidded across the road and he suffered a brachial plexus injury. when his arm and his shoulder were internally severed from his body. Wow. He said his arm's entire nerve network from the tip of his left finger to the base of his spine was ripped, torn, and shredded. His arm, his shoulder were no longer attached, and the rest of his body was so bad, they thought he wouldn't survive. He said everybody that saw him in the hospital thought he wasn't going to make it or he was dead. And look, the doctors told him. Doctors told Chinaman that him being asleep is the only thing that saved him. And they suggested that they amputate the arm. Wow. Because they had to use pieces of his bones and nerves from some of his other body parts to patch his arm together. And not to mention, his lung collapsed. But Chinaman told the doctors not to amputate his arm because he didn't want to lose his arm. And he left the hospital months later with his arm loose, hanging out the socket from his shoulder, and he went right back to touring with the 2 Live Crew. Wow. It's crazy because the girl in the back seat next to him ended up with the car's engine on her head. And the other girl that was in the front seat, look, she saw the whole thing was happening when the driver fell asleep, and she didn't say one word. She ain't trying to wake him up or nothing. She just buckled up her seatbelt and prepared for the accident. Crazy, man. But the crazy part is, they all survived the accident. But, Chinaman said his friend that was driving the car, he was just haunted by the whole accident, and he ended up dying later on in life from an aneurysm. But hey, they survived. But that arm though just gave him problems for the rest of his life, and he had to wear like an arm brace while it was hanging out the socket. Man, and with that, all that led to his addiction to painkillers, and then he would do a lot of heavy drinking and alcohol, and on top of that, he went right back to performing with the group, and he'd be on stage and performing. He would have to change the bloody gauzes every 8 hours. Wow, that's crazy. But after that, they started working on their second album, and they recorded that album at the legendary reggae group called Inner Circle. They was at their studio when they did that album. Inner Circle, man, was a bad reggae group, boy. Man, the song Bad Boys, that was the theme song for the TV show Cops. That's Inner Circle. And on August 17th, 1988, they released their second album titled Move Something, which hit number 68 on the Billboard 200 and number 20 on the top R&B hip hop albums chart. And the album went certified gold independently again. They was getting money. The singles called Move Something and Do I Diddy became very popular. They was big hits. In the Do I Diddy video, you can see Chinaman with the arm brace on from the car accident. But here's the crazy part though. A record store clerk in Alexander City, Alabama was cited for selling a copy to an undercover police officer. And that made it the first time in the United States that a record store owner was held liable for obscenity over music. Wow. But, those charges were later dropped after a jury found the record store clerk not guilty. And it's crazy because the more controversy 2 Live Crew got in, the more people wanted to work with them. Because that same year, they also did the song called Yakety Yak for the movie Twins with Arnold Schwarzenegger and Danny DeVito. Y'all remember that song Yakety Yak? And, they was in such high demand, they just kept touring around the world. Man, they went on tour with a lot of legendary rappers. Chinaman said they was on tour with Boogie Down Productions, and they remember the last show Scott LaRock did in Cleveland before he got killed. He also said look, on that same show in Cleveland, a lesbian female pimp was about to kill Will Smith, known then to the world as the Fresh Prince, because when he said Will Smith was laughing at the pimp because someone had grabbed one of the girls that was with her arm. And Chinaman said the female pimp put a shotgun right in Will Smith's face and dared him to say another word. And Chinaman and his friend had to calm the female pimp down. And Will Smith kind of snuck away. Wow, that's crazy. Look, man, and look, Two Live Crew, right? They was smart, man, ahead of their time, man. Because when they used to go on tour with all those other rap acts, they were selling their own merch and making tens of thousands a night. Luke changed the game, man. Other artists used to laugh at them too, until they found out that Two Live Crew was getting 100% of everything they did. They owned all their stuff. Two Live Crew was flying in private jets and everything during that time. Now, on February 7th, 1989, they released their third album titled As Nasty As They Wanna Be, which became their biggest selling album and their most controversial album. But you know, that album hit number 3 on the rap and R&B album charts and number 29 on the Billboard 200 charts and went certified triple platinum. That album set the world on fire. That's the album, right? They had the Miami Hurricane jackets on the beach. They was laying on the beach and they had 4 girls in front of them. The song Me So Horny, number 1, that hit number 1 on the US Billboard Hot Raps chart and number 26 on the US Billboard Hot 100. Plus stayed on the Hot 100 for 30 weeks, going certified platinum, and really didn't get no airplay like that on the radio. It really didn't get no airplay like that. It was also number 1 overseas in the Netherlands. That sample, Me So Horny, it came from the movie Full Metal Jacket. Classic movie. Full Metal Jacket, man, that's a classic movie. And as a matter of fact, Chinaman said they was watching that movie when they came up with the idea for the hook. I remember seeing them on they was on Donahue. Remember the show Donahue? They was performing the song Funk Shop. You should have seen those people's faces in the crowd, man, the audience. That's crazy. Look on YouTube and type in Two Live Crew performs on Donahue. That joint was funny, man. But then, you know, more controversy came. Trouble will come their way because now the white kids were blasting Two Live Crew at their house and at their colleges. Everybody was trying to stop them. Everybody was trying to stop them, man. Everybody wanted to stop them from putting music out. And here we go again. Al Gore's wife, Tipper Gore, and her and the American Family Association. And plus, they got the Broward County Sheriff from Florida involved now. And the sheriff told the stores selling Two Live Crew album would result in an arrest. You would be arrested if you're selling that album. They actually banned the album in Florida after a judge ruled that the album was sexually explicit, obscene, had violence, perversion, abuse of women, graphic depictions of all forms of sexual conduct, and microscopic description of human genitalia contained on the recording are comedic art and deemed nasty, harmful to minors. Another record store owner, matter of fact, it was a couple of them. This record store owner named Charles Freeman, he was arrested for selling the album to an undercover police officer. Another record store owner in Canada, way in Canada, was arrested too around that time. So to get back at the judge and sheriff, this is what Luke and Chinaman and them did. Two Live Crew performed at a club right up the street from the courthouse, and that's when they got arrested. Luke and Chinaman were both arrested for that obscenity law, whatever they passed on them. So they took it to court to appeal it. Luke and Two Live Crew was fighting for music, man, period. Because if they shut them down from their freedom of speech, they was going to shut everybody down. NWA, Public Enemy, especially the ones that did that sexual type of music like Madonna, George Michael, Prince, Cher, and all of them. They wanted to shut Two Live Crew down. And they said their music was worse than pornography. They said their music was worse than pornography when you got Playboy magazines everywhere, X-rated stores with videos and everything. Even though, the album, look, that album still had a parental advisory sticker on it to let them know that it's not for kids. But they still wanted to stop it. And they said that parental advisory sticker wasn't good enough. But they had a lot of support at that time. Two Live Crew had a lot of fan base support. Even they got a testimony from the likes of Duke University scholar Henry L. Gates Jr. Even rock star David Bowie. David Bowie supported them and spoke out against music censorship. He said when he heard they banned the album, when he heard that they banned Two Live Crew album, he went out and bought it. And he's all for freedom of thought, freedom of speech, claiming it's one of the most important things we have. He supported them. But in court, when they went to court, and the jury found them not guilty for violating obscenity laws. And the jury said that, they found many things on the album humorous and looked at it as comedy because, they was reading all the lyrics off in the court and stuff. They was just laughing at it, man. So they found the album kind of funny. So after winning that case, right, Two Live Crew thought they were good. They won. So they thought they was good to go. But Florida authorities were determined to stop them. And they started to pressure other celebrities not to support them. And that's when weeks later, they faced a lawsuit of copyright infringement for sampling Roy Orbison's song called Oh Pretty Woman. Two Live Crew had the song called Pretty Woman. If you remember, they had put a clean version of the album As Nasty As They Wanna Be. They put a clean version out called As Clean As They Wanna Be with a parental advisory sticker on the album, claiming the album does not contain explicit lyrics. But on that clean album version, they had did a sample cover of the song Pretty Woman without permission, which resulted in a lawsuit. After that, that's when Luke, and the crew took it to the Supreme Court to fight it. And the judge in the Supreme Court ruled that Two Live Crew song was a commercial parody and qualifies under fair use. And the judge also felt that their music had artistic value, so they won that case. And the entertainment industry have to thank Two Live Crew for that. They have to thank Luke and Two Live Crew for winning that case, because if it wasn't for them fighting, shows like Living Color, Saturday Night Live, and even today with social media, all the memes and people covering songs wouldn't exist. You can now do parodies. After that, another lawsuit came, but this time it was for Luke, because Star Wars filmmaker George Lucas filed a $300 million federal lawsuit charging Luke and his record company with a trademark infringement and unfair competition. But that case was settled out of court for $300,000, and that's when he had to change the label name from Luke Skywalker Records to Luke Records. Now, the good thing that came out of all that controversy they had going on was the media was just making them bigger and bigger and making their albums sell more records. And they had caught the attention of Doug Morris, who is considered today, he was once considered the boss of all bosses in the music industry. But around that time in 1990, he was the boss of Atlantic Records. And he couldn't believe that Two Live Crew was being arrested for selling music. So he offered Luke a deal with Atlantic Records for $16 million. Wow, that's crazy. It's crazy because the album, As Nasty As They Wanna Be, that album that caused all that problems, is the first recording in the history of popular music to be deemed obscene. Crazy, man. But anyway, so, they got the deal. Well, Luke got the deal with Atlantic Records, and they started working on the next album. And on July 24th, 1990, they released their fourth album titled Banned in the USA, which really was supposed to be Luke's first solo album. because Atlantic Records made a deal with him. And the first single, Banned in the USA, I remember that, man. That song hit number 20 on the US Billboard Hot 100 chart and hit number 1 on the US Billboard Hot Rap Tracks chart. Now, that sample they used was Born in the USA from Bruce Springsteen, who granted them permission, and he didn't even charge them. Bruce Springsteen was cool, man. He understood the fight and everything that they was going through. And when they performed at the MTV Awards, singer Sinead O'Connor, she hugged Luke backstage and told him she supported him and they was fighting for a good cause. Rest in peace to her too. She just passed away, Sinead O'Connor. Now, after that, September 22nd, 1990, they released a live and concert album, making them the first hip-hop group to put out a live album at that time. Wow, that's big. They became the first ever in hip-hop history to release a live hip-hop concert album. That's big. Now, on October 8th, 1991, they released their 5th album titled Sports Weekend, As Nasty as They Wanna Be, Part 2. And they only released one song off that album, which was Pop That Coochie. And the album did go certified gold. That same year, they did a song called In the Dust for the movie New Jack City soundtrack, which was a classic, and I had no idea they did that song. I used to love that song too. I thought that song was dope. That's the song when they in New Jack City, right? They played that song on the part when they was riding in the Jeep in the beginning, and G Money was telling Nino about how big crack cocaine was gonna be. A classic part in that movie, New Jack City, man. Now, they also did a song called Hanging Out for the Boys in the Hood movie soundtrack. The drums on that song is sampled from Kool and the Gang's Jungle Jazz. And it was also sampled by the R&B group called Jade for their hit song called Don't Walk Away. But after that album was released, Two Live Crew ended up breaking up. It was all over money disputes because, at the time, they say Luke was worth over $100 million. But the rest of the group said they weren't seeing no money. So, Mr. Mix and Brother Marquise, they left the group and sued Luke. They sued Luke, but Chinaman stayed with Luke. And that's when Chinaman started working on his solo album, his first solo album. And, he wanted to kind of distance himself from everybody because there was a lot of crazy mess going on from, Luke had beef with Dr. Dre and Snoop. And, the rest of the whole Two Live Crew was just a mess going on. So he distanced himself. And on July 15th, 1992, he released his first solo album titled The Chinaman on Effect Records. It was on Effect Records, which was a subsidiary of Luke Records. But that album hit number 38 on the Heat Seekers albums Billboard charts with the singles I'll Be There and Freak 'Em Down. And the album did sell over 200,000 copies, making it the first American hip-hop album to embrace having an Asian heritage. Wow. But also around that time, Chinaman ended up getting sick, man, and he found out that he had infected fluid leaking through his skin. So he had to focus on his health at that time. And in 1994, Luke and Chinaman created a new group called the New Two Live Crew. And they added a new member. His name was Verb, because Brother Marquise and Mr. Mix had left the group, so they added a new member. And on February 1st, 1994, they released their 6th album titled Back at Your Ass for the 9-4. In 1995, they all got back together. Luke, Chinaman, Brother Marquise, and Mr. Mix, they reformed Two Live Crew again. And they put out the song called Hoochie Mama for the Friday movie soundtrack for Ice Cube, right? And that song did help push that soundtrack to number 1 on the Billboard 200 for 2 weeks and the top of the R&B hip hop albums chart for 6 weeks. But then they had another falling out with Luke over money. And after that, though, they never worked together again after that fallout. That's when Chinaman, Brother Marquise, and Mix the Mix, they had signed to Little Joe Records, who used to be Luke's in-house attorney, who ended up buying all the rights to all the Two Live Crew's master recordings out of bankruptcy for $800,000. Wow. Their catalog had about 700 songs in there. So look, Chinaman, Mr. Mix, and Brother Marquis signed with Little Joe Records, and they released the album titled Shake a Little Something. But right after that album, Mr. Mix left the group over money, and he went on to pursue a solo career. And Chinaman and Brother Marquis released the final Two Live Crew album titled The Real One. But then after that album, Brother Marquis ended up leaving the group over money. After that, Chinaman started his own label called Chinaman Records. And that's when he had met rapper Flo Rida, who became his hype man. And Chinaman continued to drop music, man. In 2000, he released his second album titled Still Nasty. In 2003, he released his third album titled Stop Playing. The following year, in 2004, he released his fourth album titled Freaky Chinese. But around 2006, Chinaman said he noticed that he was tired more than usual, and he just felt very weak. And that's when he found out that he had high blood pressure, type 2 diabetes, and gastro-reflux disease. Plus, he was going through a divorce with his wife at the time. He had a lot of things going on that was stressing him out and making his health bad. But, he was trying to get back on his feet. And he had did another album. Well, it was an EP album called Get Freaky. But, things were just going bad for him at that time. And that same year, him and Brother Marquis got back together to form Two Live Crew as a duo. Now, according to Brother Marquis, he said he really didn't want to do another album. And but he had found Chinaman sleeping in his van. And he was very sick and looking weak, no medicine, basically homeless and crying at the time. So he wanted to help him out. So he did another album just to try to get him some money at the time. In 2009, Chinaman had a stroke on Thanksgiving Day. And the following year, he had another stroke. So when he went to the hospital, the doctors, man, they told him that he only had 2 years to live if he's lucky, because they discovered he had cirrhosis of the liver. Wow. And he had encephalopathy, which means damage or disease that affects the brain. It happens when there's been a change in the way your brain works, or a change in your body that affects your brain. Those changes lead to an altered mental state, leaving you confused and not acting like your usual self. And he had to take like medicine 3 times a day for that. But for the rest of his life, man, he was in a lot of pain. But he just never let people know that he was in pain, though. He was just trying to be strong about the whole thing and just deal with it. But he was really hurting inside, man. Physically, he was hurting and in a lot of pain. Then, to make things worse, after he had to have surgery to clean the tube he had in his chest from his collapsed lung, right? When the doctors did the surgery, they left a big hole in his chest that he would have to pack with gauzes and bandages to stop the bleeding when he got home. And, he was at home one day and blood was just pouring from that wound. And he had to be rushed to the hospital again. But he survived that. Now, that same year, everybody in Two Live Crew reunited as they were honorees winners at the 2010 VH1 Hip Hop Honors, the Dirty South edition. In 2015, Chinaman released his book called My Rise to Fame. Great book. Y'all definitely got to read that book. It's called My Rise to Fame. In January 2017, he released his final project. That was a compilation album named Breaking Glass Ceilings Volume 1. But months later, that same year, on July 13th, 2017, Fresh Kid Ice, Chinaman, he died from cirrhosis of the liver at a Veterans Affairs hospital in Miami. The doctor said he also suffered from acute respiratory failure and he had went into shock before he died. Wow. Sad, man. What's sad, man, is Brother Marquis said in an interview that Chinaman died broke. He died broke and in a lot of pain, and he just couldn't take it anymore. Terrible, man. Wow. Sad. Now, I definitely would love to see a 2 Live Crew movie. And what's crazy is it's supposed to be in the works. According to Luke, he said he got the movie deal already, and it's supposed to be called The Book of Luke, and it's going to be released through Lionsgate. It's based on Uncle Luke's book called The Book of Luke, My Fight for Truth, Justice, and Liberty City. And Luke got another book out too called As Nasty as They Want to Be, the uncensored story of Luther Campbell of the 2 Live Crew. So y'all can buy that on Amazon. And like I mentioned earlier, Chinaman got a book. He published his first autobiography book called My Rise to Fame. So make sure y'all support that book and buy it on Amazon, which is a great book. I read the whole book. You will hear some crazy stories, what they went through. And the women was doing all types of stuff. Get that Chinaman book and read. You'll see what I'm talking about. And I also remember somebody was working on a documentary for Chinaman. Documentary was called The Legend of the Chinaman. So I don't know. It's a trailer on YouTube, so I don't know what's up with the whole project. But hey, that Freaknik documentary is coming too. Supposed to be coming and is executive produced by Jermaine Dupri and Uncle Luke, Luther Campbell. I heard a lot of people are mad about this Freaknik documentary coming out because I guess they don't want to see how they were acting back in the day, wilding out and stuff. They all mothers and grandmothers now probably, and grandfathers and fathers. So we shall see. Supposed to be on Hulu. Brother Marquise and Mr. Mix are still doing their thing. And they're doing a lot of interviews you can catch on YouTube. So make sure y'all support them. And they got a lot of stories about Chinaman. If y'all want to hear some more stories. In 2017, man, was a rough year. Lost a lot of people, man. Prodigy from Mobb Deep. Al Jarreau. Soul legend Al Jarreau. Chuck Berry. Charlie Murphy. Fats Domino. Della Reese. I mean, a lot of people, man. And the list goes on. Chinaman, man, considered the first Asian rapper in history. He opened the doors up for all the Asian rappers today. Wow. Chinaman was only 53 years old when he died, man. 53 years old. Rest in peace. Chinaman, Fresh Kid Ice of the 2 Live Crew.